They showed up in matching polos, badges clipped to their belts, and said I had 72 hours to vacate, or they'd escalate to enforcement. What they didn't know? I run tactical de-escalation training for the actual police department. So when the HOA tried to play cop, let's just say they picked the wrong driveway. My name's Jason Morales. I'm 42, a defensive tactics instructor for law enforcement, and until recently, a pretty quiet guy who just wanted to sip his coffee on the porch and tinker with my Harley in peace. After 2 decades training officers on how to de-escalate chaos, all I wanted was a slower life. So when I bought this house on Ridgeway Lane, modest yard, wide driveway, solid neighbors, it felt like peace finally had an address. Then came the HOA. It wasn't about loud music or property damage. It wasn't even about a rule I broke. It was about control, power, misused by people who never earned it. See, these weren't just paper pushers sending passive-aggressive letters. They put on fake badges, styled themselves as community enforcers. They showed up at my door with clipboards and threats, impersonating legal authority to try and force me out. What they didn't realize is I train the people they pretend to be, and I document everything. I didn't move here to fight. But when you cross a line, when you use fear to push people from their homes, you don't just mess with zoning laws, you mess with something deeper. Dignity, safety, freedom. And I wasn't going to let that slide. Where are you watching from? Have you ever seen someone pretend they had power, only to crumble the moment they were questioned? Stick with me, because this isn't just about a fake badge and a clipboard. It's about what happens when the wrong people try to play cop and get caught in the act. When I first toured the house on Ridgeway Lane, it was quiet enough to hear the birds over the hum of traffic 3 blocks down. There was a bluebird nesting in the gutter, and the backyard opened up to a tree line thick enough to block out the next row of houses. I remember thinking, this is it. This is where things calm down. After years of teaching combatives and tactical de-escalation to police departments, up and down the county I was used to high-alert environments, rooms full of people with something to prove, egos sharp enough to draw blood, and stress levels that made your heart thump like a war drum. But I loved the work. I still do. I just didn't want to live in it anymore. So Ridgeway felt like an exhale. The house was nothing fancy. 1-story, brick exterior, steel workshop out back, the kind of place where you could plant tomatoes without asking for permission. Or so I thought. I moved in late April. Spring had just started making promises. Warm sun in the mornings, wind that didn't bite. I set up my workbench the first night, hung my old academy patches in the garage. By week 2, I'd met 3 neighbors. Dan across the street, a retired firefighter who grilled twice a week and offered me a beer from across the driveway without ever crossing it. Miss Eileen, who walked her bulldog at exactly 6:15 each morning and nodded once if she liked your lawn. And a kid named Jeremy, 13, who thought my Harley was cooler than Fortnite. There was a small HOA here. I knew that going in, but the realtor downplayed it, said they were mostly dormant, just handled the landscaping for the shared green space and made sure nobody painted their house neon green. I figured I could live with that. The first few months were exactly what I'd hoped for. I'd wake up before sunrise, jog the loop around the neighborhood, and catch that perfect light hitting the trees out back. I'd brew my coffee, sit on the porch, and read through training notes for upcoming seminars. Occasionally, I'd run through self-defense drills in the garage or walk the perimeter of the property checking the fence line. Nobody bothered me, not at first. Every Saturday, I'd spend a few hours working on my Harley, cleaning the engine, tightening the chain, detailing the chrome. It became a ritual. Sometimes Dan would nod in approval from his own driveway. Sometimes I'd catch Jeremy watching from across the street, wide-eyed, trying to be stealthy. I ended up letting him help one day, showed him how to polish the gas tank without scratching the finish. He was a good kid, curious, polite, always asking questions. One of the only reasons I didn't regret moving into a neighborhood instead of some 10-acre spread in the hills. The strangest part? For those first few months, even the HOA president seemed reasonable. Her name was Darlene Wyatt, mid-50s, always wore coral lipstick, and introduced herself during my first week with a gift basket full of lavender soap and sugar-free cookies. "We like to welcome our neighbors properly," she'd said, smiling a little too hard. I thanked her, shook her hand, and didn't think much of it. Occasionally, I'd see her walking around the cul-de-sac, clipboard in hand, making notes. She said it was for seasonal inspection rounds, though I never got the sense anyone really took it seriously. A few neighbors even joked about it. Dan once muttered, "Queen Darlene's doing her rounds again," when she passed by. Still, she hadn't caused me any problems. Not yet. There were two red flags I should have noticed. First, the monthly HOA newsletter that came folded into my mailbox like a legal summons. It was formatted like a police report. Bold letters, block paragraphs, all caps headers like notice of non-compliance and mandatory remediation timelines. No neighborhood potlucks, no birthday shout-outs. Just rules, warnings, and a thinly veiled threat of fines. Second, the Community Safety Patrol. It sounded like a neighborhood watch, but it wasn't. The newsletter listed two names beneath that header. Day. Darlene Wyatt and Deputy Chair Bruce Pennington, her second-in-command. They weren't law enforcement. They weren't affiliated with any real agency, but they used the language, the symbols, the tone, and they wore navy polos with an embroidered badge stitched onto the chest. At first I thought it was just overcompensating. A little theatrical, sure, but harmless. I figured if pretending to be in charge of a few speed bumps made them feel useful, so be it. I had better things to focus on, like prepping my summer training schedule, repainting the garage door, and building a custom rack for my tools. Everything changed the day I added a second motorcycle. It was a 2011 Kawasaki KLR I picked up at auction, half rebuilt and perfect for trail riding. I parked it beside the Harley in the driveway and planned to roll it into the garage that evening, but within 2 hours there was a notice taped to my front door. Vehicle storage violation, non-compliant with Community Aesthetic Code 4.7b, typed, laminated, signed by Darlene Wyatt, President, Ridgeway HOA Security Compliance Committee. Security and compliance? That night I got an email from an address ending in @Ridgeway HOA info, subject line, RE, escalation procedures. Inside, a scanned copy of the same violation notice, a link to a Dropbox folder titled Evidence of Infraction, and a bullet-pointed list of possible fines. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then I chuckled. They had included surveillance photos, taken from across the street. Time-stamped. Labeled, like exhibits in a case file. I almost admired the effort. But something in my gut turned. This wasn't just an overzealous neighborhood committee. This was a group of people pretending to have the kind of power that gets people hurt if misused. And in my line of work, that's not something you ignore. Still, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I responded politely, explained the bike was temporary, that I was moving it inside, that no community rule gave them the right to surveil me or threaten escalation. The next day, I came home to find two members of the Community Safety Patrol parked in my driveway. Matching polos, clipboards. One of them, Bruce, had a walkie-talkie clipped to his hip. The other wore a body cam. They didn't say hello. They said, "We're here to deliver your second violation. You're now on notice." I didn't raise my voice, didn't even move. I just said, "You might want to turn that body cam off before you impersonate law enforcement again." They looked at each other. I stepped forward. "My name's Jason Morales," I said, "and I train the people you're pretending to be." Act 2. Karen appears. Bruce's body cam blinked red as I stepped into the frame. He shifted his weight like a teenager caught shoplifting. I could tell he wasn't expecting me to push back, definitely not with that tone, and definitely not with credentials. He cleared his throat. "We're not impersonating anyone. This is an internal Ridgeway compliance procedure." "Right," I said, not breaking eye contact. "And you're on my private property, uninvited, delivering a threat under color of authority." The other guy, younger and more nervous, started to stammer, We're just following protocol from Ms. Wyatt." That was the first time I heard her name from someone under orders. Darlene Wyatt, HOA president. The one who brought me lavender soap and sugar-free cookies. The one who smiled too wide, too early. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a calculation, a preemptive peace offering in case I turned out to be difficult. I was starting to understand. Darlene didn't just want quiet streets. She wanted control. And not just the kind you vote on in annual meetings. She wanted to command the neighborhood. The officers, or whatever they fancied themselves, left with a final muttered warning. "You'll be hearing from compliance again." I waited until they were out of sight, then walked back inside and locked the door, the first time I'd ever felt the need to. The following morning, my mailbox held a manila envelope, hand-delivered. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a single page, typed, and in bold at the top. Second strike. Subject, intimidation of Community Safety Patrol. There was a line beneath it that made me laugh out loud. Residents are reminded that Ridgeway HOA volunteers are to be treated with the same respect as municipal officers. I read it twice. Then I read it again. That's when I stopped laughing. That evening, I spotted Darlene Wyatt walking up the sidewalk. No clipboard this time, just a leash, loosely dragging a yippy white dog named Muffin. She paused when she saw me sitting on the porch. "Jason," she said, with that same coral lipsticked smile, "we need to talk." I nodded slowly. "Funny, I've been getting a lot of messages from your office lately. Didn't realize you still did house calls." She didn't flinch, just tightened her grip on the leash and lowered her voice. "There's a tone problem," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "A what?" "A tone," she repeated. "With your emails. The neighborhood has a culture of mutual respect. Your responses have been confrontational. That kind of energy doesn't belong here." I stared at her, letting the silence settle like fog. She smiled again. "You seem like someone who appreciates structure, Jason. I imagine you've worked in systems where discipline matters. That's all we're doing here, preserving order. Nothing personal." Nothing personal. I'd seen that line weaponized in courtrooms. It's what you say before you ruin someone's life on paper. Over the next week, I noticed things starting to shift. Dan, the guy across the street who used to toss me beers with a smirk, suddenly stopped waving. His blinds stayed closed. His tone on the sidewalk turned cold. I found out later he'd been reminded of his own landscaping violations. Retroactive enforcement, Darlene called it. Jeremy's mom asked him to stop coming over. "Just while the HOA sorts things out," she said, clearly uncomfortable, eyes darting like she was being watched. Even Miss Eileen, sweet, punctual, dog-loving Miss Eileen, crossed the street one morning instead of passing my driveway. The isolation was surgical, quiet, deliberate. That's when the anonymous letters started. The first was tucked under my windshield wiper. "You don't belong here. This is a family neighborhood. We value peace." No signature. Printed in a font that looked like it came from a corporate HR memo. The second was left in my mailbox, against federal law, mind you. It read, "If you trained real cops, you'd know better than to provoke us." Us. The use of the word stopped me. This wasn't Darlene acting alone. She had a following. A little militia of rule enforcers, paper bullies, and polo-shirted vigilantes who believed her HOA authority granted moral superiority. And then came the letter that crossed the line. It was slid under my garage door. No envelope, just a single sentence. "You'll be gone before Labor Day, one way or another." I brought it inside, placed it under a forensic light I use for training, and found a partial thumbprint in the corner. If I'd needed confirmation this was war, I had it now. I started digging. Turns out, Darlene had been HOA president for 6 years. No term limits, no elections that anyone remembered. The Ridgeway Charter should have required a rotation every 2 years, but the last few meetings had mysteriously failed quorum, giving her automatic horaires. Tensions. The newsletters? All printed through a company she owned. The Community Safety Patrol, formed after an emergency meeting, attended only by Darlene, Bruce, and Bruce's wife. Their uniforms were funded by a discretionary line item buried in a budget most residents never read. I found all of it in HOA records filed through the city archives. And then I found something else. A zoning proposal from 3 years ago, quietly submitted and withdrawn, that would have turned 4 Ridgeway homes, including mine, into commercial access points for a private development project just beyond the tree line. Guess who filed that paperwork? Darlene Wyatt. Guess whose house sat directly on the proposed new entry road? Mine. This wasn't about motorbikes, or property values, or tone. This was personal. This was leverage. This was a cover-up wrapped in rules, tied with a bow of fake authority. She wasn't just playing cop. She was playing chess, and I'd just walked into her endgame. One afternoon, I returned home to find a truck parked in my driveway, city logo on the side, a man with a clipboard inspecting the foundation. He looked up, startled, as I stepped out of my car. "You Morales?" he asked. "Yeah." He glanced at his form. Got a report of an unpermitted structure and potential code violation. Workshop looks like it might be too close to the property line. I nodded slowly. "You got the call from the Ridgeway HOA?" He hesitated. "I'm going to need a copy of that complaint," I said. He handed me a form, signed digitally by none other than Darlene Wyatt, accusing me of housing illegal equipment and improper runoff disposal. I smiled. You mind sticking around a few minutes? Why? I stepped inside and came back with a laminated binder. Every license, permit, inspection receipt, and city email I'd ever received since moving in. I flipped to the workshop page. Built to spec, approved last year. The inspector was Roger Clements. Want his number? He stared. This is solid. Good, I said, because this isn't the last time she'll try this. He nodded. You're not the first one. I paused. Come again? She's done this before, he said, to 2 other owners. Both moved within 6 months. That night, I sat at my desk scanning every document again. I didn't feel rage, not yet. What I felt was calculation. If Darlene wanted a fight, she was about to get one, but not the way she expected. Act 3, the pressure builds. I didn't sleep that night, not from fear, I've been in rooms tenser than this, but from clarity, because once you realize someone's trying to break you quietly, legally, with the full armor of bureaucracy behind them, the only thing more dangerous than losing is underestimating how far they'll go to win. By morning, I had a plan. Document everything, communicate nothing, and wait for them to make the next mistake. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, I received an HOA packet in the mail. The envelope was thick, too thick. Inside, 36 pages, violation notices, hearing schedules, citations, all dated within the same 48-hour span. All signed by the Ridgeway HOA Compliance Enforcement Board, which as far as I could tell was just Darlene and Bruce with a printer. The violations were ridiculous. Code 2.1.7, improper garage tinting. For using a sun-reflective film I'd had approved by the city, Code 3.4.2, unregistered secondary vehicle. For a friend's car visiting overnight, Code 5.3.9, failure to respond to prior citations. For the citations I was actively appealing, each fine came with a daily accrual. Some were $50 a day. One, a $300 fine for non-native vegetation encroachment, threatened to balloon into $3,000 in just over a week. I sat down and did the math. If I accepted everything, I'd owe just over $6,400 by the end of the month. I tried calling the HOA office. No answer, no voicemail. I emailed the official Ridgeway contact twice. No reply. Then, the city got involved. A municipal code inspector showed up, again. This time, she looked embarrassed. Sorry, she said. Another anonymous complaint. We have to check. For what now? I asked. Alleged unauthorized electrical panel work. Safety concern. I walked her to the breaker box, showed her the certification from the licensed contractor, pointed to the dated inspection sticker. She nodded. Everything looks fine. Sorry to bother you. I looked her in the eye. This is the 3rd complaint in a week. She nodded quietly. We're noticing a pattern. That's when the letters started arriving at work. I run tactical de-escalation workshops for local law enforcement and security professionals. Been doing it 14 years, never had a complaint, never a disciplinary note. But suddenly, my inbox filled with vague questions from my clients. Just checking in? Is everything okay at home? Got an anonymous tip about some legal issues. Need to clarify before our next session. One of them forwarded the message. Anonymous email, but I recognize the phrasing. Mr. Morales is under ongoing code enforcement review. Thought you'd want to know. Would be a shame for someone in his position to become a liability. No signature, no traceable name, but the digital fingerprints were familiar. It was Darlene, or someone acting under her instruction, pretending again, pretending to care, pretending to protect. Only now, it wasn't just about pushing me out of Ridgeway. It was about poisoning every corner of my life. Jeremy stopped waving. That one hit harder than I expected. His mom had been civil during the first months, but now she looked through me, not past me, through me, like I didn't exist. I could feel her tension from across the street. That Friday, I overheard her speaking to another neighbor, just loud enough. Well, the HOA says he has problems. I mean, you saw the letter, right? The letter. Darlene was distributing private HOA violation letters to neighbors, personal accusations framed as public safety concerns. And people believed it, because she wore the uniform, because Bruce used the walkie-talkie, because the line between real authority and assumed authority is paper thin when the tone is convincing enough. The final straw was the patrol car. Unmarked, black SUV, parked across from my house, for hours. I've trained law enforcement long enough to know when someone's watching, and when someone wants you to know they're watching. I approached, slowly, calmly, tapped the glass. Bruce lowered the window. He wore sunglasses now, badge stitched to his chest like a cop from a mid-budget drama. "We're conducting a community watch," he said. "Unmarked vehicle? 4 hours? You're not watching the community," I said. "You're watching me," he smiled. "Well, you're part of the community, for now." I held up my phone. "You're being recorded." "No problem," he said, resting his hand near the console. "So are you." That was when I noticed the dash cam, flashing red. They'd bought surveillance equipment, real gear, not toys. Darlene wasn't just escalating, she was trying to provoke. And she wanted me to lash out, to scream, push, threaten, anything they could use to paint me as dangerous. That's when I understood the deeper strategy. Weaponize fear, create isolation, control the narrative. Because once you control the story, you don't need to be right. You just need to be loud. Then came the emergency HOA meeting. Flyers on every door, block letters, neighborhood safety summit, community vote required. The topic? Reevaluation of residency and compliance thresholds, which is code for, can we vote this guy out? Dan wouldn't meet my eyes. Miss Eileen gave me a look that might have been sympathy or warning. Jeremy didn't show up at all. The meeting was set for Saturday at noon, but I knew I wouldn't be walking in empty-handed. Because while they were printing flyers and forging violations, I'd been building something else, a digital archive of every false claim, backdated file, and retroactive edit in HOA records, copies of Darlene's withdrawn zoning plans, 3 interviews with former residents who'd been driven out in similar ways, 1 audio clip, Bruce, on a walkie joking about flushing Morales out by summer, but most importantly, I had the law. And the law wasn't on her side. Still, the worst moment of that week didn't come from Darlene. It came from the doubt. I was sitting in my kitchen, laptop open, reviewing every last document, and I caught myself wondering, what if she wins? What if no one believes me? What if I lose my job, my home, my reputation, just because a woman with a clipboard and a navy polo says I should? It was brief, but it was real. Because even the strongest people crack when every system around them starts whispering the same lie. You're the problem. You brought this on yourself. You should have kept quiet. That's when I reminded myself why I fight. Because there are people without training, without resources, without the legal knowledge. And if they went through this, they'd fold, they'd flee. But I could fight back, for them too. The Saturday meeting was approaching, and if Darlene wanted a war of paperwork and perception, she was about to see what happens when the real professionals join the conversation. The morning of the HOA meeting, I woke up before sunrise, not from nerves, but from habit. Years of training officers to stay alert under pressure makes you sharpen yourself like a tool. You learn to sit in discomfort, to breathe slower when everyone else speeds up. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and walked outside. It was quiet. The kind of quiet right before a storm breaks. The HOA had pushed me into a corner. They'd sent fake fines, slandered me, surveilled me, and poisoned my relationships with neighbors, but they hadn't done their homework. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I wasn't just some guy with a chip on his shoulder. I was the system they were pretending to be. And I'd spent the last 2 weeks doing exactly what I teach others to do in moments like this. Gather, document, confirm, and prepare to move surgically. The first piece of leverage? The law itself. Ridgeway HOA had been operating as if their little pocket of power was immune to oversight, but they weren't. They were a registered private association, subject to both municipal code and the State Homeowners Governance Transparency Act. I pulled every bylaw, ordinance, and amendment, cross-checked their violations against actual city law, made notes, built a dossier. Turns out, over half the citations they issued had no legal standing. Some were based on expired rules. Others were straight-up fabrications, non-existent code sections typed into formal letters. I printed each one, highlighted the discrepancies, and logged the originating authorship metadata using a forensic document tracker, a tool I'd helped beta test for real police departments. Ironically, Darlene's obsession with formatting had made this process irreducible. Her documents were riddled with sloppy digital footprints. The second piece? A friend named Carmen. Carmen and I met back in 2010 when I was teaching a 2-week defense seminar for the State Peace Officer Standards Training Commission. She was in her first year at the city attorney's office, specializing in property law. Now, she's assistant counsel for the Department of Consumer Protection and a bulldog when it comes to civic overreach. I sent her everything. 3 days later, she called. "Jason, this is a mess. Tell me something I don't know." "No, I mean it. These people are impersonating law enforcement, illegally issuing fines, retaliating. If this were a city agency, I'd have the state involved by Monday." "So what can I do?" She didn't pause. "You build the paper trail. You walk into that meeting and don't argue. You observe, you document, and the moment they do anything remotely illegal on the record, you record it. I'll take it from there." The third piece? Witnesses. Remember the zoning proposal I uncovered, the one that would have turned Ridgeway Homes into a throughway for a private development? I found one of the former residents it targeted, a man named Thomas Greer. He'd lived here 3 years ago. Quiet, older, moved after what the HOA called ongoing non-compliance issues. I found his contact info through a public records request and gave him a call. He picked up on the second ring. "You dealing with Darlene?" he asked before I could finish introducing myself. "I am." "Thought so. She ran me out in 7 months, said I was in violation for having an unapproved mailbox. You ever hear of such a thing?" I hadn't, but I wasn't surprised. We talked for 45 minutes. I took notes, and then he said something that made me sit up. "She offered to buy me out, you know. Said if I sold under value, she'd make the violations disappear." Next thing I key. Now I'm getting weekly letters threatening liens. He still had the emails. He sent them. I added them to the folder. The final piece? Audio. That clip I'd caught of Bruce joking on his walkie-talkie, flushing Morales out by summer, wasn't isolated. Turns out, one of my students, a corporal with Ridge County PD, lived just 2 blocks away. He'd quietly been recording interactions with Darlene's community safety patrol after they tried to tell his wife to repaint their mailbox post. He sent me 6 clips. Bruce referring to psychological pressure as a tactic, Darlene admitting they were targeting homes that disrupted Ridgeway's culture. One chilling line. Sometimes a few harsh letters get the right people to leave. Each clip was clean, time-stamped, legal. I organized everything into a drive, titled the folder Operation Cardboard Badge, and I waited. The meeting was scheduled for noon at the Ridgeway Community Hall, the same beige multi-purpose room where they hold cookie swaps and CPR classes. I arrived early, not to beat the crowd, but to watch it arrive. They trickled in slowly, Darlene at the front, clipboard in hand, coral lipstick freshly applied, Bruce, stone-faced, wearing his patrol polo like a uniform. About 20 neighbors came, some curious, some anxious, a few already poisoned against me. Darlene called the meeting to order at exactly 12:01. She cleared her throat, smiled wide, and launched into a pre-written speech. "Thank you for coming, neighbors. As you know, our priority at Ridgeway is safety, compliance, and community peace. Recent disruptions have made this more important than ever." She didn't name me, but every eye turned toward me. She continued, "We are gathered here to vote on a resolution that would grant the HOA board emergency authority to initiate removal proceedings for residents who have demonstrated a pattern of non-compliance or disruption." My hand went up. She nodded toward me. "Jason." "Before you take that vote," I said, calm and steady, "I'd like to present a brief statement and a few exhibits." I stepped forward and placed a stack of printed documents on the table, one for each neighbor. I spoke without raising my voice. "This is a summary of every violation I've received in the past month, alongside a column showing why each one is either fabricated, outdated, or legally unenforceable." There were murmurs. "This next packet is a record of surveillance footage, unmarked vehicles, and statements made by members of the Ridgeway Community Safety Patrol who are impersonating law enforcement in direct violation of city code." More murmurs. "And this," I clicked a remote and played a clip through the projector speaker, "is Bruce Pennington, your deputy chair, describing how to psychologically force residents to leave." Silence. Darlene didn't move, didn't blink. For those wondering, all of this has been sent to the city attorney's office, the Department of Consumer Protection, and several legal observers. What happens next is not in your hands, it's already in theirs. I stepped back. Nobody said a word. until Miss Eileen, of all people, raised her hand and asked, "Can we vote to remove them?" Miss Eileen's question echoed through the Ridgeway Community Hall like a window cracking under pressure. "Can we vote to remove them?" You could feel the air shift. The room, which just moments ago had been passively aligned with the smiling tyranny of the Ridgeway HOA, now sat frozen in uncertainty. Some people looked to Darlene, others looked to me. A few avoided looking anywhere at all, like children caught between arguing parents. Darlene blinked, once. Then she adjusted her clipboard. "No," she said sharply, "that is not the purpose of this meeting. We are not here to entertain hysteria. We have rules, we have procedures." Bruce nodded in stiff agreement, arms crossed like he was guarding a bank vault instead of a neighborhood clubhouse. I stayed silent. Let them squirm. Darlene turned to the crowd again, forcing a smile back onto her face like a mask made of rubber. "This disruption is exactly why we need stronger authority. If a single homeowner can throw this entire community into chaos by refusing to follow simple guidelines, then what does that say about our unity, our standards?" She turned toward me. "Mr. Morales has a military background." I cut in, calm, low, but with enough steel to silence her mid-sentence. "Law enforcement training, not military, and I never taught intimidation tactics if that's what you're implying." A few neighbors muttered, one or two gave me subtle nods. Darlene's smile twitched. "Regardless," she continued, "we're here to vote. That's the democratic process, and all I ask is that you remember, order matters, respect matters. We can't let one man's personal crusade derail the peace we've built together." That was it, her final plea. But she didn't realize something had already shifted. She had controlled the narrative for months, through fear, fabrication, and relentless control. But now, I dragged her carefully curated power into daylight, and it was melting. I stepped forward again. Not rushing, just enough movement to pull focus. "Since you like process so much," I said, "let's follow it." I pulled out a single-page document, printed cleanly, signed by Carmen from the Department of Consumer Protection. This is a cease and desist letter issued under state code, barring Ridgeway HOA from enforcing any further fines, surveillance, or retaliatory measures against homeowners pending investigation into unethical practices. Gasps. Audible gasps. Darlene reached for the letter, but I pulled it back. "Not for you," I said. "This copy's going on the bulletin board outside, along with the rest of the evidence." Then I turned to the crowd. "Some of you already know what's been happening. Others didn't want to get involved, and I don't blame you. Darlene's real gift isn't leadership, it's manufacturing sill. Hence, one letter at a time, one fine, one whisper. She didn't build community, she built a gated narrative. You could see it in their faces, recognition, shame. A few leaned forward, a few leaned away from Darlene. "But here's the thing," I continued. "This meeting was supposed to vote me out, for violations, for disruption, for imaginary offenses Darlene's been crafting for months. But it turns out, her whole foundation is fake. Her rules, her fines, her titles, even this community safety patrol, they're not real. They're cosplay, bureaucratic bullying in a polo shirt." I gestured to Bruce. "You want to play cop, Bruce? Great. Let me show you what a real audit looks like." I handed the flash drive to the appointed meeting secretary. Carol, a quiet neighbor who'd always kept her head down but had started to look increasingly disturbed by what she'd seen. "Everything's on there," I said. "Audio files, emails, zoning maps, former residents' testimonies, legal opinions. It's all indexed and cross-referenced." Carol plugged it into the projector laptop. The folder blinked open. The room went quiet. Then came the final blow. I clicked to a screenshot of an email exchange, Darlene to Bruce, dated 8 months prior. The subject line, Development Path Timeline. "If we can get rid of the Greer house and Morales, the whole strip is clear. Tell code enforcement to lean hard this month." Every eye in the room shifted to her, some with disbelief, most with disgust. Even Bruce's composure wavered, his arms uncrossed, his chin dropped just slightly. Darlene stepped forward. "You all know this is taken out of context." "Then explain the context," I said. "Explain the zoning maps you filed without public notice, the fines based on expired bylaws, the body cam footage from your volunteers, the quote about flushing me out by summer." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Nothing." You came out. Not even Muffin barked. Miss Eileen stood slowly. She wasn't smiling. I moved to suspend Darlene Wyatt and Bruce Pennington from all HOA duties effective immediately, pending external review. Someone seconded. I think it was Dan. Votes followed like dominoes, 12 hands, then 15, then 18. Darlene tried to protest, her voice rising now, panicked, no longer calm or composed. "This is illegal. You can't vote on leadership at an emergency meeting without 7 days." Carol held up a copy of the Ridgeway bylaws. Actually, under Section 8.3, emergency leadership votes can be held with a quorum present if evidence of malfeasance is introduced, which it just was. Darlene looked around, but no one was with her. Even Bruce quietly stepped back toward the door, muttering something about needing to check his truck. I didn't gloat. I just sat down, hands folded. Let it sink in. Let the power vacuum settle. For the first time since I moved in, Ridgeway felt still, not peaceful. Not yet, but still. After the meeting, a few neighbors came up to me. Miss Eileen handed me a lemon bar and said, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." Dan said, "Next cookout's on me." Even Jeremy's mom offered a quiet thank you. I nodded. I wasn't interested in praise, just truth. The secretary, Carol, asked if I'd consider serving on the interim HOA board, just until things settled. I said I'd think about it, because power is tricky. Once you take it back, the hardest part is not becoming the person you just defeated. That night I posted the cease and desist letter to the community bulletin. Below it, I taped a new sheet. No more fake fines. No more clipboards, no more silence. And beneath that, welcome to the real Ridgeway. It took less than 3 weeks for Ridgeway to feel like a new place. Not because every issue was solved, not because the HOA dissolved or the sun suddenly shined a little brighter, but because the fear was gone. And in neighborhood, it's like this, fear isn't loud. It doesn't bang on your door or wear a villain's mask. It's polite. It hides behind bylaws and laminated letters. It whispers in committee meetings and peers through blinds. When Darlene lost control, so did that fear. The difference was almost immediate. The morning after the vote, Carol sent out a short message. All Ridgeway residents are invited to a community forum this Saturday. No titles, no agenda, just neighbors. No one was fined for flyers that week. No patrol cars idled outside front lawns. No compliance notices showed up taped to windows. Instead, people began to emerge again, slowly at first, like survivors stepping into sunlight after a storm. I got a call from Carmen that Monday. "The department is moving forward with a full inquiry," she said. "You did well, Jason." "I just showed up," I said. "That's the hardest part," she replied, "showing up when no one else does." She said formal letters would be sent to every household, summarizing the legal halt on all HOA enforcement powers until the board was restructured under a neutral party. She'd recommended Carol for interim administrator. I told her that was a good call. Carol was fair, quiet, and most importantly, uninterested in power. As for Darlene, 2 weeks after the public vote, she sent out one last message via email, a resignation letter. It was 6 paragraphs long, written in her trademark cold formality. She blamed toxicity, cyberbullying, and misinformation, claimed the community had been hijacked by hostile outside influences and that she'd feared for her safety, but no one replied. No one came to her defense. Bruce moved out quietly a week later. The community safety patrol polo shirts disappeared with him. Jeremy told me his mom saw them packing boxes late at night trying to avoid the neighbors. Nobody protested. Some people just knew when it was time. Me to go. The Saturday forum was beautiful. It was just a folding table and a box of donuts. No speaker system, no rules. Carol brought coffee, Dan brought his grill and smoked sausages in the back lot. Jeremy and 2 other kids kicked a soccer ball across the green for the first time in months. Even Miss Eileen brought a batch of brownies, with sugar this time. We sat in lawn chairs and folding seats and just talked. One neighbor suggested removing a few of the more obscure rules from the handbook. Another asked if we could install a proper bench at the mail kiosk. Someone made a joke about no longer needing permission to own a bird bath. Everyone laughed. And in that moment, I felt it. Community. Real community. The kind that isn't dictated. The kind that happens when people stop watching each other and start seeing each other. I didn't take a position on the new board. They offered. Carol even nudged me a few times. but I declined. I don't want to be a sheriff, I told her. I just want to live. She smiled and said, fair enough. Instead, I offered to hold a free workshop right here in Ridgeway for anyone interested in knowing their rights when dealing with HOAs, city code, or private enforcement. We held it under a canopy near the Greenbelt. 22 people showed up. Not bad for a neighborhood that used to be afraid of speaking above a whisper. I patched up things with Jeremy's mom, too. She brought over banana bread and told me she'd been living in quiet panic for years. They told me I could lose access to the pool, to the rec center, even my mailbox key, all for letting my kid ride a bike after dusk. I told her I believed her, because I did, because I'd lived it, and I knew that fear turns good people into ghosts. As for me, I still drink my coffee on the porch every morning. Only now, people wave. Some stop to chat, some just smile, but the paranoia is gone. The surveillance is gone. That black SUV doesn't show up anymore. Instead, Jeremy occasionally pops over to LP me whacks the Harley. I let him rev the engine. He always grins like it's the loudest thing in the world, and it probably is. The old workshop? Still standing. I added a fresh coat of paint and hung a small sign on the door. No badges, no clipboards, no threats. Just below it, questions welcome. Because that's what they tried to take, the right to ask questions, the right to live without intimidation masquerading as order, the right to challenge power when it goes unearned and unchecked, and they lost. A few months later, Carol stopped by again. The new HOA board had been officially certified. The bylaws had been revised. Power had been redistributed, limited this time by design. She handed me a folder. This is the updated charter. I thought you should see it. Inside was a new clause written at the top of the page in bold. No individual or committee shall hold enforcement authority without direct community vote and oversight. I nodded. Good language, she smiled. Yours, actually, from the workshop. Before she left, she paused. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why'd you fight so hard? I mean, you could have just moved. I looked out at the street, the trees, the house, the neighborhood that had nearly eaten itself alive. Because bullies don't need power to win, they just need silence. I turned back toward her, and I don't do silence. Final note to viewers. They tried to use fake fines, fake titles, and fake authority to drive me out of my home. But what they didn't know, I train the people they pretend to be, and I don't scare easy. Endline options. Bruce took off his fake badge, Darlene turned in her clipboard, and Ridgeway finally started acting like a neighborhood instead of a kingdom. They called me disruptive, but all I disrupted was their illusion of control. They tried to vote me out. Now I vote on what flowers go in the rec center garden. Have you ever faced fake authority? Someone using fear to get what they want? Drop your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. And remember, sometimes all it takes to end the show is someone pulling back the curtain. Have you ever dealt with power that wasn't real, but still hurt people anyway? A clipboard, a fake badge, a tone that says, I'm in charge, when nobody voted for them to be. If you've ever stood your ground, or wanted to but couldn't, drop your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Because these stories aren't just about HOAs, they're about who gets to decide what peace looks like, and who has the courage to protect it, for real.